The fever had taken Garrett Wyatt to the edge of death 3 days ago, and now, as he lay shivering in his mountain cabin despite the August heat of 1878, he was certain the Grim Reaper had finally come to collect what was owed. Through eyes hazed with delirium, he watched the cabin door swing open, flooding the dim space with brilliant afternoon sunlight that seemed to set the very air ablaze with golden fire. A figure stepped through that impossible radiance, backlit and glowing, moving with such ethereal grace that Garrett's fevered mind could reach only one conclusion. An angel had come to take him home, his massive frame, usually corded with thick muscle from years of trapping and hunting in the Gila wilderness of Arizona territory, now trembled beneath sweat-soaked blankets. Dark hair that normally fell past his shoulders in thick waves was matted to his skull. He tried to speak, to ask the celestial being if his time had truly come, but his parched throat produced only a rasping sound that barely qualified as a whisper. "Dear God," the angel said, and the voice was decidedly feminine, touched with concern rather than divine judgment. "Sir, can you hear me?" Garrett blinked hard, trying to clear his vision. The figure moved closer, and details began to emerge from the halo of light. Not an angel, but a woman. A real flesh-and-blood woman with hair the color of desert sand at sunset, loose and tumbling over her shoulders. She wore a traveling dress that had seen better days, dusty and torn at the hem, and her face bore the evidence of recent hardship in the form of a bruise blooming purple along her left cheekbone. "Water," he managed to croak. She rushed to the bucket near his crude kitchen area, dipped a tin cup, and returned to kneel beside his bedroll. One slender hand slipped beneath his head, lifting gently, while the other brought the cup to his cracked lips. Garrett drank greedily, some of the precious liquid spilling down his bearded chin. "Slowly," she cautioned, "not too much at once." When he had drunk his fill, she lowered his head back to the pillow with surprising tenderness. Garrett studied her through clearer eyes now. She was young, perhaps 22 or 23, with features that spoke of strength rather than delicate beauty. Her eyes were the color of sage and morning light, gray-green and sharp with intelligence. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice still rough but more coherent. "My name is Zelda Winters," she replied, setting the cup aside. "I saw smoke from your chimney and thought perhaps someone might help me. Instead, it seems you are the one in need of help." "Been sick," Garrett admitted, the simple act of speaking exhausting him. 3 days, maybe 4. Lost track. Zelda placed a cool hand against his forehead, and even in his weakened state, Garrett felt something electric pass between them at the contact. She pulled back quickly, a faint color rising in her cheeks. "You're burning with fever," she said. "When did you last eat?" Garrett tried to remember. The world had become a blur of heat and chills, of nightmares and brief moments of clarity. "Do not know." "Then we shall start with broth," Zelda announced, rising to her feet with determination. She moved about his cabin with the purposeful efficiency of a woman accustomed to making do with what was available. Garrett watched through heavy-lidded eyes as she examined his meager supplies, finally producing a bundle of dried venison and some withered vegetables he had forgotten existed. "What happened to your face?" he asked as she worked at the stove, building up the fire. Her hand rose involuntarily to the bruise, then fell away. "That's a long story, Mr. Wyatt." "How did you know my name?" "I saw it carved into that magnificent chair by the window," she replied, nodding toward the oak rocking chair Garrett had painstakingly crafted during his first winter in these mountains. "I assumed it belonged to you." "You assumed correctly." Another wave of chills racked his body, and he pulled the blankets tighter around himself. "But you still have not told me how you came to be wandering alone in the wilderness." Zelda was quiet for a long moment, her back to him as she stirred the pot. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and steady. "I was traveling to Gila City with my uncle and his wife. We were attacked by bandits 2 days ago on the road from Tucson. They killed my uncle, took his wife and all our belongings, and left me for dead when I tried to fight them." The words hit Garrett like a physical blow, cutting through even the fog of fever. "God Almighty." "I walked for a day and a half before I found your cabin," Zelda continued, still focused on the pot rather than meeting his eyes. "I had no water, no food, and no idea if I was even heading in the right direction. When I saw your chimney smoke, I thought I might be hallucinating." "You are real enough," Garrett said quietly, "and I am sorry for your loss." She turned then, and he saw tears glistening in those sage-green eyes, though none fell. "My uncle was a good man. He deserved better than to die on a dusty road at the hands of thieves." "No argument from me on that account." Zelda wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand and returned her attention to the stove. "But dwelling on what cannot be changed serves no purpose. Right now you need tending, and I need a safe place to gather my strength. It seems Providence brought me to your door, Mr. Wyatt." "Garrett," he corrected, "if you are going to be nursing me back to health, we can dispense with the formalities." A small smile touched her lips, the first he had seen. "Then you must call me Zelda." She brought him the broth shortly after, and though his stomach rebelled at first, the warm liquid eventually settled and stayed down. Zelda sat beside him on an overturned crate, watching to ensure he finished every drop. "When did this fever start?" she asked. 4 days ago, I think. Woke up feeling poorly, thought it was just something I ate. Got worse by nightfall." Garrett paused to catch his breath, the act of speaking still taxing. "Went down to the creek for water the next morning, slipped on some rocks. Hit my leg pretty good. By evening I could barely stand." "May I see the injury?" Garrett hesitated, then nodded. Zelda pulled back the blanket covering his lower half, revealing a nasty gash on his right calf that had gone red and angry with infection. She sucked in a sharp breath. "This needs to be cleaned and dressed properly," she said. "Do you have any whiskey?" "Cabinet by the door." She retrieved the bottle and some clean rags, then set about the task with steady hands, despite the grimace that crossed her face when she got a closer look at the wound. Garrett gritted his teeth as she poured the alcohol directly into the gash, the burning pain momentarily eclipsing even the fever. "I am sorry," Zelda murmured, "but infection has set in deep. This is the only way to fight it." "I know," Garrett managed through clenched jaw. "Do what you need to do." She worked in silence for the next hour, cleaning the wound thoroughly, applying a poultice made from herbs she found in his surprisingly well-stocked medicine chest, and binding it with strips of clean cloth. By the time she finished, Garrett was drenched in sweat and shaking, but the wound looked considerably better. "You should rest now," Zelda said softly. "Sleep is the best medicine for fever." "Where will you sleep?" Garrett asked, suddenly aware that his cabin contained exactly one bed. "I shall make do with blankets by the fire," she replied. "I have slept in worse places these past 2 days, I assure you." He wanted to argue, to insist she take the bed while he made do with the floor, but exhaustion was pulling him down into darkness before he could form the words. The last thing he remembered before sleep claimed him was Zelda spreading a blanket over him with gentle hands, her face soft with an expression he could not quite name. When Garrett woke again, pale morning light was filtering through the cabin's single window. The fever still gripped him, but it felt less intense than before, and his mind was clearer. He turned his head to find Zelda already awake, sitting in his rocking chair with one of his books open in her lap. "You read?" he asked, his voice startling her. She looked up, a faint blush coloring her cheeks at being caught. "I hope you do not mind. I found your collection and could not resist. It has been so long since I had anything to read." "Mind? I'm just surprised to meet anyone else out here who knows their letters." Garrett tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as the room spun around him. "Slowly," Zelda cautioned, setting the book aside and moving to help him. She propped him up with blankets and pillows until he was in a semi-reclined position. "Your fever broke sometime in the night, but you are still very weak." "What time is it?" "Mid-morning, I would guess. I've already been down to your creek for fresh water and gathered some wild onions I found growing near the banks." She smiled, looking pleased with herself. "I shall make you something more substantial than broth for breakfast." As she prepared the meal, Garrett found himself watching her with growing fascination. There was something remarkable about this woman who had walked out of the desert half dead herself, only to immediately begin caring for a complete stranger. She moved through his cabin as though she belonged there, humming softly under her breath as she worked. "What were you going to do in Gila City?" he asked. Zelda glanced over her shoulder. "My uncle had secured me a position as a school teacher. The town has been advertising for months, apparently. They have enough children now to warrant a proper school, but no one willing to come out to such a remote location." "You are a teacher?" "I was, back in Missouri. After my parents died, I lived with my uncle and his wife for 2 years, but I could not find work in Tucson. When the opportunity in Gila City arose, it seemed like providence. Her expression grew somber. Now I'm not certain what I shall do. The position is likely still available, Garrett pointed out. Gila City is only about 15 miles northeast of here. Once you have rested, I can take you there. Once I have rested? Zelda turned to face him fully, one eyebrow raised. Garrett Wyatt, you can barely sit up without turning pale as milk. You are in no condition to take anyone anywhere. He had to concede the point. Then we shall both rest and recover. God knows this cabin has been lonely enough. I would not mind the company. Something shifted in Zelda's expression, a guardedness that had not been there before. I do not wish to impose, and I certainly do not wish to give you the wrong impression about my character. Garrett understood immediately. A young woman alone with a man in an isolated cabin, it could ruin her reputation if word got out. You have my word as a gentleman that you are safe here. I am in no condition to threaten anyone's virtue, and even if I were, that is not the kind of man I am. She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. I believe you. There is something about you, Garrett Wyatt. Even burning with fever and weak as a kitten, you have an honesty in your eyes. High praise from someone I met yesterday. Sometimes you know things about a person right away, Zelda said quietly. Some souls are simply easier to read than others. She brought him breakfast shortly after, a surprisingly good mixture of eggs, onions, and the venison, all fried together into something that tasted better than anything Garrett had eaten in months. He said as much, and Zelda laughed. Ah, that is the fever talking. I am an adequate cook at best. Then adequate is a sight better than what I am used to. They fell into an easy pattern over the following days. Zelda tended to Garrett's wound, changing the dressing twice daily and making fresh poultices from the herbs in his collection. The infection slowly retreated under her diligent care, and the fever gradually loosened its grip on his body. In return, Garrett taught her about the mountain, pointing out through the window which plants were edible and which would make her sick, which animal tracks meant danger, and which meant dinner. On the 4th day of her residence in his cabin, Garrett was finally strong enough to stand and walk a few paces, though he still tired easily. Zelda insisted he sit outside in the sunshine for at least an hour, claiming the fresh air and light would speed his recovery. You've been cooped up in that dark cabin for over a week, she said firmly, brooking no argument. You need sunlight and clean air. Garrett lowered himself carefully into a chair she had dragged outside, grateful for the warmth on his face. The mountain stretched out before them in all its wild glory, ponderosa pines reaching toward the cloudless sky, rocky outcroppings catching the light like scattered jewels. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals with effortless grace. It is beautiful here, Zelda said, settling into a second chair beside him. Harsh, but beautiful. I can see why you chose this life. Truth be told, the life chose me as much as I chose it. Garrett leaned back, closing his eyes and letting the sun soak into his skin. I came west after the war, looking for something I could not name. Tried my hand at cattle ranching, mining, even prospecting for a while. Nothing felt right until I came to these mountains. Something about this place spoke to me. The war, Zelda repeated softly. You fought? For the Union. 3 years of hell that I would just as soon forget. He opened his eyes and looked at her. What about you? What brought your family west? My uncle was a doctor. He believed he could do more good in a place that desperately needed medical care than in a crowded city where there were physicians on every corner. Her voice caught slightly. He treated people regardless of their ability to pay. Mexicans, Indians, cowboys, outlaws, he did not care. If someone was hurt or sick, he helped them. He sounds like he was a fine man. He was the best man I ever knew. Zelda was quiet for a moment, then added, his wife Martha was with child, 3 months along. Those bandits took her, and I do not know if she is alive or dead, or what horror she might be enduring if she still lives. The anguish in her voice cut Garrett to the bone. Did you get a good look at any of them? Anything that might help identify them? The leader had a scar across his nose, shaped like a lightning bolt, and he wore a silver ring with a snake carved into it. I noticed because he hit me with that hand. Zelda touched the bruise on her face, which had faded to a sickly yellow-green. There were 5 of them in total. Garrett filed away the information, though he said nothing. He was in no condition to hunt down bandits, and even if he were, leaving Zelda alone in the cabin would be unthinkable. But the description might prove useful later, should their paths ever cross those men. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the hawk continue its lazy circles overhead. Finally, Zelda spoke again. "May I ask you something personal?" "You can ask. Whether I answer is another matter." She smiled at that. "Why do you live alone up here? A man like you, strong, capable, clearly educated given your collection of books, you could have your pick of opportunities in town. Yet you choose isolation." Garrett considered the question. It was one he had asked himself many times over the years, especially during the long winter months when loneliness sat heavy on his shoulders like a physical weight. "After the war, I found I could not abide crowds anymore," he said slowly. "Too much noise, too many people, all of them wanting something. Up here, the only demands made on me are the ones necessary for survival. Hunt, gather wood, maintain the cabin, tend the trap lines. Simple, honest work with no pretense or complication. Do you never get lonely?" "Of course I do. I would be lying if I said otherwise." He glanced at her. "But lonely is better than feeling like a stranger in a crowd of people who were supposed to be your friends and neighbors." Zelda nodded as though she understood perfectly. "I felt that way in Tucson, surrounded by my uncle's acquaintances, people who were kind and well-meaning, yet I never truly belonged. I was always the poor orphaned niece, the object of pity rather than a person in my own right." "Is that why you took the teaching position?" "Partly. I also genuinely love teaching. There is something remarkable about watching a child's face light up when they finally grasp a concept they have been struggling with. It makes all the frustration and difficulty worthwhile." "You will make a fine teacher in Gila City," Garrett said. "Those children will be lucky to have you." She turned to look at him, and something in her expression made his breath catch. "And what about you, Garrett Wyatt? Will you return to your solitary existence once you have delivered me safely to town?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither of them seemed quite ready to address. Before Garrett could formulate an answer, a sound from the trees made him stiffen. The crack of a branch, too loud and deliberate to be an animal. "Get inside," he said quietly, his hand moving instinctively to where his rifle would normally rest, only to remember it was still in the cabin. "What is it?" "Someone is out there. Go now." Zelda did not argue. She rose quickly and moved to the cabin door, but did not go inside. Instead, she grabbed Garrett's rifle from where it leaned just inside the entrance and brought it to him. "I'm not leaving you out here alone," she said firmly. Before Garrett could protest, a figure emerged from the tree line. A young Mexican boy, perhaps 12 or 13 years old, dressed in ragged clothing and looking half-starved. He raised his hands immediately when he saw the rifle. "Please, senor," the boy said in accented English. "I mean no harm. I'm looking for the doctor, Dr. Winters. I was told he lives in these mountains." Zelda made a small sound of distress. "Who told you that?" The boy's eyes widened as he took in her appearance. "Senorita Winters? You're alive? We thought when we found the wagon and the bodies, we thought everyone was dead." "Bodies?" Zelda's voice was barely a whisper. "You found my aunt?" The boy's face fell. "I'm sorry, senorita. The woman. She was already gone when we came upon the wagon. We buried her properly, said prayers. It was all we could do." Zelda swayed on her feet and Garrett reached out to steady her despite his own weakness. She gripped his arm hard enough to hurt, and he felt silent, sobs shaking her frame. "Why were you looking for the doctor?" Garrett asked the boy gently. "My mother? She is very sick. A fever, and she cannot keep food down. My father sent me to find the doctor because we have no money for the doctor in town, but we heard there was a good man in the mountains who would help anyone." The boy's voice cracked. "Please, my mother is dying." Garrett looked at Zelda, who had composed herself though tears still streamed down her face. She met his gaze, and he saw the same thought reflected in her eyes. "I have some medical training," she said, addressing the boy. "My uncle taught me much of what he knew. I am not a doctor, but I will do what I can to help your mother." "Zelda, you cannot," Garrett protested. We do not know where this boy came from or how far we would have to travel. I am barely able to walk, let alone protect you on the road." "Then you will stay here and continue recovering," she said with a firmness that brooked no argument. "This child's mother is dying, Garrett. I will not turn my back on someone who needs help. You cannot go alone into the wilderness with a stranger. I am not a child who needs protecting." Zelda's eyes flashed with something fierce and unyielding. "My uncle would never have turned away someone in need, and neither will I. It is what he would have wanted, what he would have done." Garrett knew he had lost the argument before it truly began. He could see the determination in every line of her body, the set of her jaw. And truth be told, he admired her for it, even as it terrified him. "How far is your home?" he asked the boy. "Half a day's walk, senor. Maybe less on horseback." "I do not have a horse," Garrett said. "Lost him to a mountain lion last spring. But I can make it half a day on foot if we go slow." "Garrett, no," Zelda began. "I am coming with you," he said flatly. "I may not be at full strength, but I am still a better deterrent to trouble than you going alone. And before you argue, know that you will not change my mind on this." They stared at each other for a long moment, and then Zelda's expression softened. "You are as stubborn as you are honorable. I will take that as a compliment." They gathered supplies quickly, Zelda packing the medical chest, while Garrett loaded his rifle and filled a canteen with fresh water. The boy, who introduced himself as Miguel, waited patiently, though his eyes kept darting back toward the trees, as if he could will them to move faster through sheer force of anxiety. The journey was harder than Garrett had anticipated. His leg ached within the first hour, the healing wound protesting the exertion, but he gritted his teeth and pushed forward, using a stout branch as a walking stick. Zelda stayed close to his side, ready to offer support if he faltered, though she never commented on his obvious discomfort. Miguel led them through terrain that grew increasingly rugged, following paths that were barely visible to the untrained eye. They crossed a narrow creek 3 times, clambered over rockfalls, and pushed through stands of manzanita that caught at their clothing like grasping hands. As they walked, Miguel told them about his family. His father worked in the mines near Silver City, brutal labor that paid barely enough to keep food on the table. His mother took in washing when she was well enough, and Miguel himself did odd jobs wherever he could find them. They lived in a small settlement of Mexican families, people who had been pushed to the margins by the influx of Anglo miners and settlers. "The doctor in town, he will not come to our part of the settlement," Miguel said bitterly. "He says we cannot pay, so why should he waste his time? But your uncle, Senor Doctor, he came when my little sister was sick last year. He did not ask for money, just said we should pay him when we could. We gave him eggs and vegetables from our garden all summer." Zelda's eyes were bright with unshed tears. That sounds exactly like something he would do. The settlement appeared as the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. A collection of small adobe structures and ramshackle wooden buildings clustered in a narrow canyon, smoke rising from cooking fires. Children playing in the dusty road stopped to stare at the newcomers, and women appeared in doorways, watching with wary expressions. Miguel led them to a small adobe house with a wooden door that hung slightly crooked on its hinges. He pushed it open and called out in Spanish. A man appeared from the dim interior, his face lined with worry and exhaustion. "Papa, I brought help," Miguel said. "This is Señorita Winters, the doctor's niece. She knows medicine." The man looked at Zelda with a mixture of hope and desperation that was painful to witness. "Please, Señorita, my Rosa, she burns with fever. Nothing we do helps." Zelda stepped forward without hesitation. "Take me to her." Inside, the house was clean but sparse, containing little more than a table, a few chairs, and a bed in the corner where a woman lay motionless beneath a thin blanket. Zelda went immediately to her side, placing a hand on the woman's forehead before pulling back with concern. "How long has she been like this?" she asked. 3 days, Miguel's father replied. "It started with stomach pains, then the fever came." Zelda began a systematic examination, asking questions in a mixture of English and rudimentary Spanish. Garrett stood near the door, giving her room to work while keeping a watchful eye on their surroundings. The father, who introduced himself as Juan, hovered nearby, wringing his hands. After several minutes, Zelda straightened. "I believe it is food poisoning. something she ate that has made her very ill. The good news is that it should pass if we can keep her hydrated and comfortable. The fever is the body's way of fighting the infection. She spent the next hour showing Juan and Miguel how to prepare a solution of water, salt, and a tiny amount of sugar, which she instructed them to give to Rosa in small sips every few minutes. She also made a tea from herbs in her medical chest, something to help settle the stomach and reduce the fever. She will need constant care for the next day or two, Zelda explained. Someone must stay with her at all times, making sure she drinks and monitoring the fever. If it gets worse, send for me immediately. You are leaving? Juan asked, dismay clear in his voice. We cannot stay the night here, Garrett interjected gently. It would not be proper, and we have our own camp to return to. But we are not far. If you need us, send Miguel. Juan nodded understanding, though disappointment shadowed his features. How much do we owe you, señorita? Nothing, Zelda said firmly. Just take good care of your wife and send word when she is recovered. That will be payment enough. The walk back to the cabin was slower and quieter than the journey out. Darkness was falling by the time they reached familiar territory, and Garrett's leg was screaming with pain. He had been pushing himself far beyond what his healing body could handle, and it was catching up to him with a vengeance. We need to stop, Zelda said as Garrett stumbled for the third time. You are going to collapse if you keep pushing like this. The cabin is only another mile or so, and you will never make it. She pointed to an outcropping of rocks that formed a natural shelter. We can rest there for a few hours, wait for the moon to rise. It will give us more light to travel by. Garrett wanted to argue, but his body had other ideas. His leg gave out without warning, and he went down hard, barely catching himself before his face met the dirt. Zelda was at his side instantly, her arm around his waist. Stubborn man, she muttered, helping him to his feet. You are going to undo all the healing you have accomplished. She guided him to the shelter, which proved to be deeper than it had appeared from the path. There was room for both of them to sit comfortably, and the rocks still held warmth from the day's sun. Zelda made Garrett stretch out his injured leg, then carefully unwrapped the bandage to check the wound. It is bleeding again, she said with a sigh. I knew this was too much too soon. The boy needed help, and his mother's going to recover because we went, but that does not mean you should have sacrificed your own health in the process. She cleaned the wound with water from the canteen and applied fresh bandaging. You are staying in bed for the next 3 days minimum. I do not want to hear any arguments. Yes, madam, Garrett said, too tired to protest. Zelda settled beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her body in the cooling night air. Above them, stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, more stars than seemed possible, scattered across the heavens like diamonds on black velvet. Thank you for coming with me today, Zelda said softly. I know it cost you dearly. I would do it again, Garrett replied honestly. You were right to want to help. Your uncle would have been proud. She was quiet for a moment, then said, I've been thinking about Martha, about the fact that she is gone. I knew it was likely, but hearing it confirmed still hurt. She was kind to me when she did not have to be, and the baby, they never even had a chance to meet their child. Garrett reached out and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. It was a bold gesture, perhaps too bold, but it felt right. To his relief, Zelda did not pull away. Instead, she squeezed his hand and leaned her head against his shoulder. Life out here is hard and often cruel, he said. I have seen good people die for no reason and evil men prosper. It never gets easier to accept. You just learn to keep moving forward. Is that what you did after the war? Kept moving forward? I tried. Some days were easier than others. He paused, then added, Having you here these past days, it has reminded me that there is more to life than simple survival. I had forgotten what it felt like to share space with someone, to have conversations that went beyond the strictly practical. Zelda lifted her head to look at him, her face barely visible in the gathering darkness. Are you saying you have enjoyed my company, Garrett Wyatt? I'm saying that the prospect of taking you to Gila City and returning to an empty cabin fills me with a loneliness I have not felt in years. He heard her sharp intake of breath, felt her hand tighten in his. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Zelda said very quietly, What if I were to tell you that I am in no particular hurry to reach Gila City? Garrett's heart began to beat faster. I would say that a few more days of recovery before undertaking the journey would be sensible. Medical advice, you might say. Very sensible, Zelda agreed, and he could hear the smile in her voice. After all, we would not want you to have a relapse. They sat together in the darkness, hands clasped, neither willing to acknowledge aloud the thing that was growing between them. It was too new, too fragile, like a seedling that needed careful tending before it could be exposed to harsh sunlight. But it was there, undeniable and precious, and Garrett found himself hoping that Zelda felt it too. When the moon finally rose, bright and full, they made their way slowly back to the cabin. Garrett leaned heavily on Zelda, his leg nearly useless now from the day's exertion. She guided him with patient determination, never complaining about his weight or the slowness of their progress. At the cabin, she helped him to the bed and removed his boots with gentle hands. Then she cleaned the wound again, applied a fresh poultice, and bound it tightly. "Sleep now," she commanded. "I will wake you if the fever returns." But the fever did not return. Instead, Garrett slept deeply and dreamlessly for the first time since his illness began, aware on some level that Zelda was nearby, watching over him. It was a comfort he had not known he needed, and when he woke the next morning to find her asleep in the rocking chair with a blanket draped over her lap, something in his chest tightened with an emotion he could not quite name. The following days passed in a gentle rhythm. Garrett rested as ordered, though he chafed at the inactivity. Zelda kept herself busy tending to his wound, preparing meals and organizing his chaotic collection of supplies with ruthless efficiency. She also read voraciously from his collection of books, and in the evenings they would discuss whatever she had been reading that day. "I never took you for a man who enjoyed poetry," she said one evening, holding up a worn volume of Walt Whitman. "There's a lot you do not know about me yet," Garrett replied from where he sat propped up in bed. "Yet," Zelda repeated, a small smile playing at her lips. "Does that mean you intend for me to learn more?" "That depends entirely on whether you plan to stay long enough for the lessons." She set the book aside and crossed to sit on the edge of his bed, something she had grown comfortable doing over the past days. "What if I told you that the idea of leaving fills me with dread?" Garrett reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Then I would say you should stay as long as you like. The cabin is yours as much as mine now." Zelda leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. When she opened them again, they were bright with emotion. "People will talk if they learn I am living alone with you. There is no one up here to talk except the trees and the animals, and they are terrible gossips but remarkably discreet." She laughed at that, a sound that had become precious to Garrett over the past week. "What about when we need to go into town for supplies? What then?" "Then we will face that problem when it arises." Garrett pulled her closer, emboldened by the fact that she did not resist. "Right now, all I know is that I've never felt more alive than I have these past days with you here. I am not ready to let that go." "Neither am I," Zelda whispered, and then she was kissing him, soft and sweet and perfect. Garrett wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close despite the awkwardness of his position. She tasted of the wild mint tea she'd been drinking, and her hair smelled like wood smoke and sage. The kiss deepened, and Garrett felt years of loneliness melting away under the warmth of her touch. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zelda rested her forehead against his. "We are probably making a terrible mistake." "Probably," Garrett agreed, "but I find I do not care." "Neither do I." She kissed him again, quick and fierce. "We shall figure out the details later. For now, this is enough." Miguel appeared at the cabin 3 days later, with the news that his mother had recovered fully and was back to her normal activities. He also brought a basket filled with fresh tortillas, eggs, and vegetables as payment for Zelda's services. "Mama says you are an angel sent by God," the boy announced solemnly. "She wants you to know that you will always have a place at our table." Zelda accepted the basket with tears in her eyes. "Tell your mother I am grateful for the kind words and the generous payment, and tell her to take care of herself." After Miguel left, Garrett found Zelda standing at the window, staring out at the mountains with an unreadable expression. He came up behind her, resting his hands on her shoulders. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking that I was supposed to be a teacher in Gila City, and instead I am playing house in a mountain cabin with a man I have known for barely 2 weeks." She turned to face him. I am thinking that my entire life has been upended, and I do not know what I am supposed to do now. Garrett understood her uncertainty. They existed in a bubble here, isolated from the judgments and expectations of the outside world. But that bubble could not last forever. What do you want to do? He asked. Zelda bit her lip, considering. Honestly, I want to stay here with you, but I also feel like I'm abandoning my responsibilities, my promise to teach those children in Gila City. Those are not mutually exclusive desires, Garrett pointed out. Gila City is only 15 miles away. We could make the journey in a day easily, speak with whoever is in charge of hiring the teacher. You could take the position if you still want it, and I could bring you back and forth. You would do that? I would do considerably more than that if it meant keeping you in my life. He cupped her face in his hands. Zelda, I know this is fast and probably foolish, but I am falling in love with you. I have been since the moment you walked out of that light and I thought you were an angel. The idea of you leaving, of going back to my solitary existence, it is unbearable. Zelda's eyes filled with tears. I am falling in love with you too. It terrifies me how much I feel after such a short time, but I cannot deny it. You make me feel safe and cherished and alive in ways I never have before. Then we shall make it work, Garrett said firmly. However we need to, we shall find a way. They rode into Gila City the following week, both of them mounted on a horse Garrett had purchased from a neighbor who lived several miles north. The town was larger than Garrett had expected, a bustling community that had grown up around the mining operations in the area. False-fronted buildings lined a wide main street, and the sound of hammers and saws suggested ongoing construction. The man in charge of hiring the teacher was a portly fellow named Samuel Hutchinson, who served as the de facto mayor. He received them in his office at the general store, his expression one of relief when Zelda introduced herself. Miss Winters, we had quite given up hope of seeing you, he said, pumping her hand enthusiastically. When we heard about the attack on the road and the deaths, well, we assumed the worst. I am delighted to see you alive and well. Thank you, Mr. Hutchinson. I apologize for the delay in presenting myself. Nonsense, nonsense. Under the circumstances, you have nothing to apologize for. His gaze shifted to Garrett, taking in his imposing frame and long hair with barely concealed curiosity. And who is your companion? This is Mr. Garrett Wyatt, Zelda said smoothly. He found me after the attack and nursed me back to health. I owe him my life. Then we all owe him our gratitude, Hutchinson said, though his expression suggested he was reserving judgment. Now, about the teaching position. It is still available if you want it, though I should warn you that the conditions are somewhat primitive. We have a building for the school, but it needs work, and you will be responsible for students ranging from age 5 to 15. I expected as much, Zelda replied. May I see the schoolhouse? The building in question was at the far end of town, a simple structure with a roof that had seen better days and windows that were more gap than glass. Inside, there were rough benches but no desks, a fireplace that was clogged with debris, and a floor that was more dirt than wood. It needs work, Hutchinson admitted, looking embarrassed. We have been without a teacher for so long that maintenance has fallen by the wayside. Zelda walked through the space, her expression thoughtful. It has good bones. With some effort, it could be quite serviceable. Does that mean you are accepting the position? I am, with one condition. Zelda glanced at Garrett, who gave her an encouraging nod. I live several hours from town and would need to travel back and forth. I cannot be here every single day, but I can commit to teaching 3 days per week to start, more if arrangements can be made. Hutchinson frowned. We were hoping for a full-time teacher who would live in town. Then I am afraid we may have a problem, because I am not willing to live in town. Zelda's voice was pleasant but firm. However, I am willing to work harder on the days I am here to make up for the reduced schedule, and I would suggest that 3 days of quality instruction is better than no instruction at all. The mayor hemmed and hawed, clearly unhappy with the arrangement but also aware that he had limited options. Finally, he sighed. Very well, Miss Winters. 3 days per week to start. We pay $20 per month, and you will be expected to provide your own materials and supplies. Agreed. Zelda shook his hand. When would you like me to begin? As soon as possible. Many of the children have been running wild without schooling for nearly a year. They settled on the following Monday as her start date, giving Zelda time to prepare lessons and gather materials. As they left Hutchinson's store, Garrett could not help but feel a surge of pride in the woman walking beside him. She had negotiated for what she wanted without backing down, and she had done it with grace and determination. "That was impressive," he said once they were mounted and riding out of town. "I learned long ago that if you do not advocate for yourself, no one else will," Zelda replied. "Besides, I meant what I said. I'm not willing to give up my life with you, just for the convenience of living in town." "Our life," Garrett corrected gently. "Not yours or mine, but ours." She smiled at him, the expression so full of affection that it made his chest tight. "Ours," she agreed. The next several weeks established a pattern that quickly became routine. Zelda would spend Monday, Wednesday, and Friday in Gila City, teaching a diverse group of children who ranged from eager students to reluctant attendees who had been forced to attend by their parents. Garrett would bring her to town in the morning and return to pick her up in the evening, spending his time in between running errands, making purchases, and occasionally taking jobs that helped supplement his income from trapping. On the days between, they worked on improving the cabin and the surrounding property. Garrett built proper shelves for Zelda's growing collection of teaching materials, expanded the garden plot so they could grow more vegetables, and began construction on a small addition to the cabin that would serve as a dedicated bedroom, allowing the main room to be used for other purposes. Zelda threw herself into making the space more livable. She sewed curtains from fabric purchased in town, organized the chaos of Garrett's belongings with ruthless efficiency, and established routines for cooking, cleaning, and maintaining their supplies. She also continued to tend his leg, which had healed well under her care, but still pained him on cold or damp days. In the evenings they would sit together by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. Garrett told her stories of his time in the war, things he had never spoken of to another living soul. Zelda shared memories of her childhood, of parents who had loved her fiercely until fever had taken them both within days of each other, and they fell deeper in love with every passing day. It was not without challenges. There were times when Garrett's silence and tendency toward isolation frustrated Zelda, just as there were moments when her need for conversation and social interaction exhausted him. They argued occasionally, sharp words exchanged in the heat of the moment, but they always made up before the sun set, neither willing to let anger fester into something larger. The people of Gila City gradually accepted the unusual arrangement, though there was certainly gossip about the unmarried teacher who lived in the mountains with a reclusive trapper. Zelda faced it with her head held high, refusing to be ashamed of her choices. "Let them talk," she said one evening after a particularly uncomfortable encounter with some of the town's more judgmental women. "I know the truth of what we are, and that is all that matters." "It bothers you, though," Garrett observed. "Of course it bothers me. I am human, and I do not enjoy being the subject of speculation and gossip." She sighed. "But I would rather face 1,000 disapproving looks than give up what we have." "We could make it official," Garrett said quietly. "Get married. That would silence most of the talk." Zelda turned to stare at him. "Are you proposing to me, Garrett Wyatt?" "I suppose I am, though I'm making a hash of it." He took her hands in his. "I love you, Zelda. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to wake up every morning with you beside me and fall asleep every night holding you in my arms. I want to build a life together, a real life, not just this in-between existence we have been living." Tears spilled down Zelda's cheeks. "I love you too, more than I ever thought possible. And yes, Garrett Wyatt, I will marry you." He kissed her then, pouring every ounce of love and gratitude and hope into the gesture. When they broke apart, both were smiling despite their tears. "When?" Zelda asked. "As soon as we can arrange it. Tomorrow, if possible." She laughed. "Perhaps we should give people a bit more notice than that, but soon, yes, I do not want to wait any longer than necessary." They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church in Gila City. Miguel and his family attended, as did several of Zelda's students and their parents. Samuel Hutchinson served as a witness, his earlier reservations about the match apparently overcome by the sheer rightness of seeing Garrett and Zelda together. Zelda wore a simple blue dress that she had sewn herself, and Garrett had trimmed his hair and beard into something approaching respectability. They spoke their vows in voices that trembled with emotion, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the small gathering erupted in applause. The celebration afterward was modest but heartfelt. Juan and Rosa brought food they could ill afford to share, insisting it was the least they could do for the woman who had saved Rosa's life. Zelda's students presented her with wildflowers they had picked that morning, and several of the women who had previously whispered about her now offered genuine smiles and congratulations. As the sun began to set, Garrett and Zelda rode back to the cabin, now officially their home, rather than simply a place where they lived. They were both quiet during the ride, overwhelmed by the enormity of the commitment they had made. "Are you happy?" Garrett asked as they neared familiar territory. "Happier than I have ever been," Zelda replied honestly. "Are you?" "I never thought I would have this," Garrett said. "After the war, after everything I saw and did, I thought I was too broken for this kind of life. But you have healed me in ways that go far beyond the physical." She reached across the space between their horses and took his hand. "We have healed each other. That is what love does. It makes us whole." That night, in the privacy of their cabin, they consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that left them both shaken. Afterward, lying tangled together in the narrow bed, Garrett held Zelda close and marveled at how completely his life had changed. "I thought you were an angel when you walked through that door," he murmured into her hair. "And I was right, just not in the way I imagined." "If I am an angel, then you are my salvation," Zelda replied. "You gave me a home when I had nothing, showed me what it means to be cherished." The months that followed were some of the happiest of Garrett's life. Zelda continued teaching in Gila City, and her students thrived under her patient instruction. Several children who had been considered unteachable began to read and write, and the parents started to appreciate the value of education for their children. Garrett found that being married suited him in ways he had not anticipated. He enjoyed the small domestic rituals they had established, the simple pleasure of preparing breakfast together or discussing the day's events over dinner. He also discovered that Zelda had a gift for making friends, and through her he began to form connections with people in town that went beyond simple business transactions. When winter came, harsh and unforgiving as mountain winters often were, they were well prepared. Garrett had spent months gathering firewood and stocking the cabin with supplies, while Zelda had preserved vegetables from the garden and put up jars of jam and pickled goods. Teaching became impossible with the heavy snows, so Zelda spent the long winter months reading, sewing, and planning lessons for the spring. It was during one of those long, snowbound nights that Zelda revealed her news. "I'm with child," she said quietly, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. Garrett froze in the act of adding wood to the fire. "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be without a doctor's confirmation. All the signs are there." She looked at him with anxious eyes. "Are you pleased?" He crossed to her in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms. "Pleased? Zelda, I'm terrified and overjoyed in equal measure. We are going to have a child." "We are," she confirmed, and then she was laughing and crying at the same time while Garrett held her and tried to process the reality of impending fatherhood. The pregnancy progressed well, despite the isolation of the mountain winter. Garrett fussed over Zelda constantly, worrying about every twinge and discomfort until she finally had to order him to stop hovering. But his protectiveness was born of love, and she could not truly be angry with him for it. As the snows began to melt and spring arrived in tentative green shoots, they made the journey to Gila City to consult with the doctor there. He confirmed what Zelda already knew and estimated that the baby would arrive in late summer. "You should consider staying in town as you get closer to your time," the doctor advised. "Mountain cabins are no place for childbirth, especially for a first baby." But Zelda refused. "I have been reading my uncle's medical texts. I know what to expect and how to handle complications if they arise, and Garrett will be with me. That is all I need." The doctor was clearly unhappy with the decision, but could not force her to comply. As they left his office, Garrett pulled Zelda aside. "Are you sure about this? If something were to go wrong, we would be hours away from help." "I am sure," Zelda said firmly. "Our child will be born in our home, surrounded by love. That is more important than any medical facility." Garrett wanted to argue, but he could see her mind was made up. And truthfully, the idea of their child being born in the cabin where they had found each other held a certain poetry that appealed to him. Summer arrived in a blaze of heat and wildflowers. Zelda's belly swelled with the growing baby, and Garrett made sure she wanted for nothing. He hunted and fished to keep their larder stocked, tended the garden with meticulous care, and began crafting a cradle from sweet-smelling pine. One evening in late August, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Zelda's labor began. She had been feeling off all day, restless and unable to settle, and when the first contraction hit, she knew immediately what it meant. "Garrett," she called, and something in her voice brought him running from where he had been chopping wood outside. "Is it time?" "It is time." He helped her into the cabin, got her settled on the bed they had prepared for this moment, and tried not to let his terror show. Zelda gripped his hand hard as another contraction rippled through her. "I need you to be calm," she said through gritted teeth. "I need you to be strong for both of us right now." Garrett took a deep breath and forced himself to focus. "Tell me what to do." Zelda talked him through the process, her voice remarkably steady despite the pain. She had studied for this moment, read everything she could find about childbirth, and now she drew on that knowledge to guide them both through the ordeal. The labor lasted through the night and into the next day. There were moments when Garrett thought he might break, watching the woman he loved suffer and being unable to do anything to ease her pain. But Zelda was incredible, drawing on reserves of strength he had not known she possessed, working with her body rather than fighting against it. Finally, as the afternoon sun streamed through the cabin windows, a baby's cry filled the air. Garrett, who had been supporting Zelda through the final pushes, found himself holding a tiny, squirming infant covered in blood and vernix. "A girl," Zelda gasped, tears streaming down her exhausted face. "We have a daughter." Garrett placed the baby on Zelda's chest, his hands shaking. "She is perfect. You are perfect. I cannot believe you just did that." Zelda laughed weakly. "Neither can I, truthfully." She looked down at the baby, who had stopped crying and was now blinking up at her parents with dark eyes. "Hello, little one. We have been waiting for you." They named her Grace, after Zelda's mother, and from the moment she drew her first breath, she had both of them wrapped completely around her tiny fingers. Garrett discovered that fatherhood transformed him in ways he could never have anticipated. The fierce protectiveness he felt for Zelda extended to this small, fragile creature, and he found himself willing to do absolutely anything to keep her safe and happy. Zelda recovered quickly from the birth, her strength and resilience once again proving remarkable. Within weeks, she was back to her normal activities, though she insisted on bringing Grace with her everywhere. The cabin filled with the sounds of a baby's cries and coos and gurgles, sounds that Garrett had never thought to hear in his isolated mountain home. When Grace was 3 months old, Zelda announced her intention to return to teaching. Garrett was initially hesitant, worried about her taking on too much too soon, but Zelda was insistent. "I love being a mother, but I also love teaching," she explained, "and we could use the extra income. Grace can come with me. She is young enough that she will sleep most of the day anyway." So they established a new routine. 3 days a week, Garrett would drive Zelda and Grace into Gila City in the wagon he had purchased specifically for this purpose. Zelda would teach with Grace in a basket beside her desk, and the students quickly became enamored with the baby, treating her like a class pet. The years that followed were full and rich. Grace grew from a baby into a toddler, then into a bright, curious child who loved books as much as her mother and the wilderness as much as her father. Zelda continued teaching, becoming a beloved fixture in Gila City, while Garrett expanded their homestead, adding rooms to the cabin and clearing more land for farming. When Grace was 4, Zelda became pregnant again, and this time the baby was a boy they named Gabriel, after Garrett's father who had died before the war. Gabriel was as different from his sister as night from day, all energy and mischief where Grace was thoughtful and quiet. The cabin that had once housed a solitary, lonely man now rang with the sounds of family. Children's laughter, Zelda's singing as she worked, the barking of the dog they had acquired to help with hunting, all of it combined to create a symphony of domestic life that filled Garrett with contentment. Not everything was easy, of course. There were hard winters when food ran low, and everyone went to bed a little hungry. There were illnesses that terrified them, injuries that required Zelda's medical knowledge to treat, and moments of friction when the pressures of frontier life threatened to overwhelm them. But through it all, Garrett and Zelda held fast to each other and the love that had brought them together. On difficult days, Garrett would remember the moment Zelda had walked out of the light and into his life, and he would marvel at how a chance encounter had transformed everything he thought he knew about himself and what he wanted. Miguel and his family became close friends, visiting regularly and sharing meals and celebrations. Juan taught Garrett improved farming techniques he had learned from his own father, while Rosa and Zelda spent hours discussing herbal remedies and traditional medicine. Miguel himself grew into a fine young man who eventually became Garrett's apprentice, learning the skills of trapping and mountain survival. As the children grew older, they began to attend school with the other children in Gila City. Grace proved to be a natural student, devouring books and excelling in every subject. Gabriel was more interested in the outdoors, often sneaking away from lessons to explore the surrounding area. "He reminds me of you," Zelda said one evening as they watched Gabriel chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "Is that a compliment or a criticism?" Garrett asked with a smile. "Both," she replied, kissing his cheek. "He has your wandering spirit and your need for freedom. Grace has my love of learning and your intensity. They are perfect, just like their mother." "Flattery will get you everywhere, Mr. Wyatt." He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "Have I told you today that I love you?" "Only 3 or 4 times. You are slipping." "Then let me remedy that immediately." "I love you, Zelda Wyatt. I have loved you from the moment you walked into my cabin like an angel sent to save me, and I will love you until my last breath leaves my body." She turned in his arms, her eyes bright with emotion. "And I love you, Garrett Wyatt. You gave me a home when I had nothing, a family when I was alone, and a love I never dreamed possible. You are my heart, my home, my everything." They kissed as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of red and gold. Grace and Gabriel played nearby, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze, and in that moment, everything was exactly as it should be. The years continued to pass, measured not in dates on a calendar, but in the growth of their children and the deepening of their love. Garrett's hair began to show threads of silver at the temples, and Zelda noticed fine lines appearing at the corners of her eyes. But these signs of aging only made them more precious to each other, evidence of a life well lived and shared. When Grace turned 16, she announced her intention to become a teacher like her mother. Zelda wept with pride and immediately began preparing her daughter for the examinations required to obtain a teaching certificate. Grace studied with the same intense focus she brought to everything, and within a year she had secured a position at a new school being established in Silver City. Gabriel, at 14, showed no interest in formal education beyond the basics. Instead, he spent his days with Garrett, learning everything his father could teach him about surviving and thriving in the wilderness. He had a natural gift for tracking and could read signs in the forest that even Garrett sometimes missed. "He will be fine," Zelda assured Garrett one night when he expressed worry about Gabriel's future. "Not everyone is meant for books and classrooms. He has skills that will serve him well, skills you have taught him." "I just want him to have opportunities," Garrett said, "to choose his own path rather than feeling limited by circumstances." "And he will. We have given both our children the foundation they need to build whatever lives they want. The rest is up to them." It was around this time that word came of the bandits who had killed Zelda's uncle and aunt. A group of outlaws matching the description Zelda had provided years ago had been captured after attempting to rob a bank in Tucson. Among their possessions was a silver ring with a snake carved into it. The territorial marshal came to the cabin personally to inform them and to ask if Zelda would be willing to testify at the trial. She agreed without hesitation, despite the difficulty of dredging up those painful memories. The trial was held in Tucson, and Garrett accompanied Zelda, leaving Grace in charge of Gabriel and the homestead. Seeing the men who had destroyed her family was harder than Zelda had anticipated, but she stood in that courtroom with her head high and told her story in a clear, unwavering voice. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. The judge sentenced the men to hang, and Zelda watched from the courthouse steps as they were led away in chains. Is it wrong that I feel no satisfaction? She asked Garrett as they prepared to leave town. I thought justice would bring some kind of closure, but I just feel empty. Justice cannot bring back what was lost, Garrett said gently. Your uncle and aunt are still gone, but perhaps knowing that those men will not hurt anyone else provides some small comfort. Perhaps, Zelda agreed, though she did not sound convinced. The journey back to the cabin was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. But as they crested the final ridge and saw their home spread out below them, smoke rising from the chimney and the children visible moving about the yard, Zelda felt some of the heaviness lift from her shoulders. This is what matters, she said, pointing toward the scene below. Not the past with all its pain, but this. The life we have built, the family we have created, the love that binds us all together, this is what my uncle would have wanted for me. Garrett took her hand and squeezed gently. Then we honor his memory by living well and loving fiercely. Yes, Zelda agreed. That's exactly what we do. More years passed, bringing both joy and sorrow in the way that life always does. Grace married a young doctor she met while teaching in Silver City, a kind man named Thomas who treated her with the love and respect she deserved. The wedding was held at the cabin, with half of Gila City in attendance, and Garrett walked his daughter down the aisle with tears streaming openly down his weathered face. Gabriel eventually left home to work as a guide for expeditions into the deeper wilderness, putting his skills to profitable use. He would disappear for months at a time, then reappear with stories of adventures that left Zelda simultaneously proud and terrified. He is so much like you, she told Garrett after one of Gabriel's visits. That same restless spirit, always seeking what is beyond the next horizon. He will settle eventually, Garrett predicted. Once he finds the right woman, he will understand that the greatest adventure is not out there in the wilderness, but in building a life with someone you love. His words proved prophetic when Gabriel returned from one expedition with a quiet, dark-haired woman named Sarah, who he introduced as his wife. They had married in a small ceremony in Santa Fe, and Sarah was already pregnant with their first child. Zelda welcomed her new daughter-in-law with open arms, and Sarah quickly became part of the family. She had a gift for healing, and she and Zelda would spend hours discussing various remedies and treatments, combining Sarah's knowledge of indigenous medicine with Zelda's more traditional training. The cabin expanded again to accommodate the growing family. During the summers, it was not uncommon for 3 generations to gather around the long table Garrett had built, sharing meals and stories and laughter. Grace would bring her children, 2 daughters and a son, and Gabriel would arrive with Sarah and their growing brood of 4 boys. On one such gathering, as Garrett sat surrounded by his children and grandchildren, Zelda caught his eye across the crowded room. She smiled at him, that same smile that had captured his heart all those years ago, and mouthed the words, "I love you." Garrett felt his chest tighten with emotion. How had he gotten so lucky? How had the broken, lonely man who had lain dying in a mountain cabin ended up with all of this? It seemed impossible, like a dream from which he might wake at any moment. But it was real. The noise and chaos and love filling his home were all undeniably real, and they were his. Later that night, after everyone had finally settled into various sleeping arrangements throughout the cabin and the new addition, Garrett and Zelda lay together in their bed, holding each other in the darkness. "What are you thinking?" Zelda asked softly. "I'm thinking about the day you walked through that door," Garrett replied. "I was so sick and out of my mind with fever that I truly believed you were an angel coming to take me home. And instead, you gave me a home. You gave me everything." He kissed her forehead gently. "I was right about one thing, though. You did take me home. Just not in the way I expected." Zelda was quiet for a moment, then said, "Do you remember what you said to me that first night, after I had tended your wounds and you were falling asleep?" "I do not think I remember much of those first few days clearly. You said thank you for not letting me die alone, and I promised you that I would not, that I would stay as long as you needed me." She paused. "I did not know then that I would end up needing you just as much, or that staying would become the greatest decision of my life." "We saved each other," Garrett said simply. That is what love does. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by the sounds of their family breathing in the darkness. And Garrett, who had spent so many years alone in these mountains, marveled once again at the unexpected blessings life could bring. As the years continued to accumulate, Garrett and Zelda settled into the comfortable rhythms of long marriage. They had been together for over 30 years now, and they moved around each other with the practiced ease of people who knew each other's thoughts and needs without speaking. Zelda still taught occasionally, though she had officially retired and now served more as a mentor to younger teachers. She spent her time tending her extensive herb garden, writing letters to her far-flung children and grandchildren, and working on a memoir about her experiences as a frontier teacher. Garrett, now in his 60s, had finally slowed down enough to enjoy the simple pleasures of watching the seasons change from his porch. His body bore the marks of a life lived hard, old injuries that ached in cold weather and joints that protested more than they used to. But he was healthy and strong for his age, still capable of chopping wood and maintaining the property, though he now had Gabriel's help when the work became too demanding. The cabin had become something of a landmark in the region. People passing through would often stop to meet the legendary couple, the mountain man and the teacher who had built a life together against all odds. Zelda would welcome them with her customary warmth, offering coffee and conversation, while Garrett would tell stories of the old days when the territory was wilder and more dangerous. One evening in early autumn, as they sat together watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of amber and rose, Zelda turned to Garrett with a serious expression. "I want you to promise me something," she said. "Anything. When my time comes, I want to be buried here, on this mountain, not in some town cemetery, but here where we built our life together." Garrett's throat tightened. He did not like to think about a time when Zelda would not be beside him, but he knew the promise was important to her. "I promise, and I want the same. We started here together, and here is where we should rest." She took his hand, her fingers still strong despite the arthritis that had begun to affect her joints. "We have had a good life, have we not?" "The best life," Garrett confirmed, "better than I ever dreamed possible." "No regrets?" "Not a single one." "You," Zelda smiled. "Only that we did not have more time. But I suppose we must be grateful for what we were given, rather than greedy for what we cannot have." They sat in silence as darkness fell, each lost in memories of the decades they had shared. So much had changed since that August day when Zelda had stumbled into Garrett's cabin, yet the core of what they were to each other remained constant. They were partners, lovers, best friends, each other's home. The years that followed were gentler, marked by quiet contentment rather than adventure. Grandchildren grew into adults and began having children of their own, making Garrett and Zelda great-grandparents. The family tree they had planted together now spread wide and strong, its branches extending far beyond the mountain cabin where it had all begun. Grace, now in her 50s, had become a prominent educator, writing textbooks and traveling to train teachers throughout the territory. Gabriel had settled down considerably, running a successful guide business while raising his sons to be as capable in the wilderness as their father and grandfather. Garrett and Zelda watched it all with pride, marveling at how much their family had grown and flourished. On special occasions, when everyone could gather together, the cabin would overflow with people spanning 4 generations, all connected by the love that had started with a sick man and a lost woman who had found each other in the wilderness. One spring morning, Garrett woke to find Zelda already up and sitting at the table with a cup of tea, staring out the window at the mountains she loved. He joined her, pouring his own coffee from the pot she had prepared. "Beautiful morning," he observed. "Every morning with you is beautiful," Zelda replied, turning to smile at him, "even the difficult ones." "Feeling philosophical today?" "Perhaps. I was just thinking about how different my life would have been if those bandits had not attacked our wagon, if I had not wandered into these mountains, if you had not been sick that day." She shook her head in wonder. So many small moments that could have gone differently, yet here we are. "Here we are," Garrett echoed, reaching across the table to take her hand. "And I would not change a single thing." "Liar," Zelda said affectionately. "You would change your first proposal. You have said many times that you wish you had done it more romantically." "True enough. I should have taken you somewhere beautiful, gone down on one knee properly, made a grand gesture. I prefer the way it happened. Honest and straightforward, just like you. She squeezed his hand. Besides, you have more than made up for it in the years since. I have never doubted for a moment that you love me. Good. Because I do. More than life itself. They finished their breakfast and went about their daily routines, but there was a sweetness to the day that seemed to infuse even the most mundane tasks. Working side by side in the garden, Garrett found himself stopping frequently just to look at Zelda, memorizing the way the sunlight caught in her gray hair, the focused expression she wore when transplanting seedlings, the small smile that played at her lips. "What?" she asked, catching him staring. "Just appreciating the view," Garrett replied with a grin. "Charmer, get back to work before those weeds take over everything." As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they finished their work and cleaned up for dinner. Zelda had made Garrett's favorite stew, rich with vegetables from their garden and seasoned with herbs she had grown herself. They ate slowly, savoring both the food and the conversation, discussing their plans for the coming week and debating whether Gabriel's latest letter indicated he might visit soon. After dinner, they moved to the porch as they did most evenings, settling into the rocking chairs they had used for decades. The chairs bore the marks of long use, worn smooth in places from countless hours of sitting, but they were comfortable and familiar. "Do you remember the first time we sat out here together?" Zelda asked. "You were still recovering from your fever, and I insisted you needed fresh air and sunshine." "I remember thinking you were the bossiest woman I had ever met," Garrett said with a laugh. "And I remember being grateful for it because you were right. I needed tending, and you provided it. We have taken good care of each other over the years. That we have." They rocked in comfortable silence, watching the sky transform through its evening palette of colors. A cool breeze carried the scent of pine and wild sage, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled its lonely song to the rising moon. "Garrett," Zelda said softly, "thank you." "For what?" "For everything. For taking me in when I had nothing, for loving me so completely, for building this life with me, for being exactly who you are." Her voice wavered slightly. "I could not have asked for a better partner to share this journey with." Garrett felt his eyes sting with emotion. "The thanks go both ways, my love. You saved my life in more ways than one. Before you came, I was merely existing, not truly living. You taught me how to do that again." Zelda reached across the space between their chairs and took his hand. They sat like that as full darkness fell, hand in hand, hearts intertwined, grateful beyond measure for the love they had found and nurtured through all the years. The stars emerged one by one, filling the sky with their ancient light, and Garrett thought about how small they were in the grand scheme of things. Two people on a mountain in the vast Arizona territory, their lives a mere blink in the endless march of time. Yet their love felt enormous, significant, like it might outlast even the mountains themselves. "I love you, Zelda Wyatt," he said into the darkness. "And I love you, Garrett Wyatt," she replied, "always and forever." They remained on the porch until the night grew too cold, then retreated inside to the warmth of their cabin. Garrett banked the fire while Zelda prepared for bed, and they came together beneath the quilt she had made over the years, each one a testament to her skill and patience. In the darkness, Garrett held his wife close and listened to her breathing gradually slow and deepen as sleep claimed her. He stayed awake a bit longer, unwilling to miss a moment of the peaceful contentment that filled him. Tomorrow would bring new tasks and challenges, as all tomorrows did. But tonight, all was well. His family was healthy and thriving, his home was secure, and the woman he loved more than anything in the world was safe in his arms. It was more than enough. It was everything. As Garrett finally drifted off to sleep, his last conscious thought was of gratitude. Gratitude for the fever that had brought Zelda to his door, for the second chance at life and love that she represented, for every moment they had shared and would continue to share for whatever time remained to them. He had thought she was an angel coming to take him home, and in a way, he had been right. Zelda had taken him home, just not to the afterlife he had expected. Instead, she had shown him that home was not a place but a person, not a destination, but a journey shared with someone who understood your heart. And what a journey it had been, filled with more love, laughter, and joy than one man probably deserved. But Garrett had learned long ago not to question good fortune, only to accept it with humble gratitude and do his best to be worthy of it. As he slipped into dreams, Garrett smiled, knowing that when he woke, Zelda would be there beside him, as she had been every morning for decades and would be for all the mornings to come. It was a certainty as solid as the mountains themselves, as enduring as the love that had transformed two lonely souls into one unbreakable whole. Their story had begun with a moment of grace when a sick man and a desperate woman had found each other against all odds. It would continue through whatever challenges and blessings the future held, sustained by the unshakable foundation they had built together. And when their time on this earth was finally done, they would rest together on the mountain they loved, their story complete, but their love eternal, a testament to the transformative power of opening one's heart to the unexpected miracles that life sometimes offers. The end.